Hey everybody, Adam from realworldworship.org here, and I'm going to do a series of videos talking about the Kemper Profiling Amp. About a month ago, I switched over to the Kemper from traditional analog tube amps and pedal boards, so I want to talk a little bit about my decision-making process in going to that place. So I first tried a Kemper about 2 years ago, and I was not impressed. And I kind of wrote it off. And I had some friends, who would say, oh, you got to try it again. I love it. It's the best thing ever. But I just kind of wrote it off. I had a really bad experience. Then, last March, I was asked to play guitar in the band at a big church worship leaders conference. And I'm like the world's okayest guitar player, so I don't get asked to play very often. But it was an honor, and so I showed up, Church Collective West Coast Conference in Modesto, California, and I showed up to play. I had my Kemper Starliner with me. This was the very guitar I had with me, and my pedal board, and they said, well, you bring your guitar and your pedal board, we'll have an amp for you. And so I expected a Vox AC-15, a Fender Blues Junior, something like that, right? And I walked in, and they had a Dr. Z Z-Rec for me. And that's a crazy nice amp, and I own a nice amp. I have a Benson Monarch. It's a really nice amplifier. And the Dr. Z Z-Rec is like another $1,000, $1,500 more at least, maybe $2,000 more in cost. It's a really nice, really expensive amplifier. I was ecstatic to get to play through this amplifier. The guitar player next to me was playing through a Fender Blues Deluxe. And the other guitar player, there were 3 guitar players on stage, the other electric guitar player was using a Kemper. Okay, so all of us are plugged in. The 2 guys with tube amps, we're going from our pedal boards into radial SGI boxes that are going into a back room, isolated off with these guitar amps isolated and mic'd through the system. In the room, I guarantee that Z-Rec sounded best. I guarantee that in the room that Z-Rec sounded best. But through the system and through the in-ears and all of that, it all sounded the same. There was not a noticeable tone difference between the Fender Blues Junior, the Dr. Z Z-Rec, and the Kemper. So right now I have the Kemper. It's set to Brian Carl's British Clean, which I believe is based off of like I believe that it's based off of a Morgan Vox style amp. And that's my preset for like modulated delay. I use that basically for that if I'm in a song where it just requires light strumming and picking. I kind of want an 80. If I kind of want an 80s sound, that's kind of where I go to. In the mix, in the room, can you tell that is not an amplifier that's being mic'd up? And I just can't. I'm not saying that I can't tell the difference, like blindfolded I can't tell the difference, because there are times when I can tell that it's a digital amp. I can tell that it's not quite right. Certain profiles, certain settings, I can just tell the difference. And in the room, a tube amp will sound better. I recently plugged my Benson Monarch in for the first time after spending about a month with the Kemper, and I just plugged it in. I got the pedal board out, I got the guitar out, I plugged it in. It sounded better in the room. But at church, it's not in the room with me. For volume reasons, because I want to crank that amp up a little bit, it is in another room, isolated with an SGI box that's running out to it, and we're just getting the mic'd cab coming over the front of the house. Nobody can tell the difference. In fact, I'll switch over. This is my kind of clean tone setting. That's a Benson profile. I can tell the difference, but in the room, in the mix, playing with the band, you really can't. So that was the first big decider for me in deciding to switch over to the Kemper. The other thing was during that weekend, I was having a conversation with the guy who was playing the Kemper, and I was talking about my experience, and he said, "What profile did you try?" And what I remembered was that the guy in the guitar shop where I tried it said, "Yes, we profiled it off of this amp." So the guitar shop had made the profile off of one of their amps, and he said, "Oh, that's the thing. It's profile centric." And what that means is if you don't get a good profile, if you don't get a good capture, and if it's not a great amp to begin with, if you don't have the right equipment, then it's not going to sound right. That's why people spend the money they do on aftermarket profiles, because you have guys who have the nicest microphones, the nicest studio consoles. They're using high-end equipment to get the fullest capture sound of that amplifier. Now remember, it's not supposed to sound like the amplifier. It's supposed to sound like what an amplifier sounds like mic'd in isolation or what have you. But the profile makes all the difference. And so if you were like me and you tried a Kemper and it wasn't a great profile, and some of the stock profiles are not great, it's kind of ridiculous that a company that has invested so much into such a good product, their stock profiles are kind of, I went through it before I put any aftermarket profiles on. I just went through each stock profile, and I found some pretty decent ones. I found some okay ones, but for the most part, I used the ones that I paid money for after the fact. So part of my decision was realizing that my bad experience was based off of a bad profile. When I tried it again with good profiles, totally different experience. And the last thing that kind of drove me to switching over to a Kemper was just allocation of resources. All of us, whether we have a large gear budget or a small gear budget, have a certain amount of resources that we can designate to each part of our gear. We can spend so much on a guitar, we can spend so much on an amp, we can spend so much on a pedal board. And I kind of made the decision that the way that technology was going, what I was doing, meaning that all the time my amp was in an isolation room, mic'd, it wasn't in the room with me, that the best allocation of my resources was to go digital. And so I tried the Helix at first, and there are things I like better about the Helix, but for the most part, I chose the Kemper. I think it sounded better, but I wanted to allocate my resources that way. So I'm focused now. I'm not buying pedals because I'm using the Kemper's onboard effects. Don't need to buy any more amps because I have all of these amp profiles. I still have my Benson Monarch, by the way. I didn't sell my tube amp. But now I have the resources to devote to guitars. And that's really the thing that's not going to change. I have this guitar with the TV Jones Gretsch-style pickups. I have a American Standard Telecaster. I have a Titan KR1. There's another video on my channel for that with Lawler gold foils and a Lawler Special T. And I have a Jazzmaster style guitar coming. Different guitars, different feels. It's what I'm actually holding and playing. And that's what I'm choosing to focus my resources on. My allocation of resources has shifted from effects and pedals and amps to guitars because I have the Kemper. So that's why that was my decision-making process. It may not be your decision-making process. In fact, I highly doubt it will. But maybe this gives you some insight into what I was thinking, and it answers some question that you had. If you have any other questions, leave them in the comments. You can check out realworldworship.org, and look forward to hearing from you.